Gittin Daf, the test begins with the Mishnah. Mishnah leaves behind the topic of Mfanei Nachtam, and the giving of the get, and goes on to the writing of the get, and what inks and what surfaces you could use to write the get. So the Mishnah discusses both of them, and the Gemara on this daf will focus on the ink. So the Mishnah says what type of ink is approved. So the Mishnah gives us a general rule that it's anything which is permanent, and then it gives a few examples of things which are acceptable and things which are not. So on the acceptable list, as defined by the Gemara, is ink, which the Gemara says is black ink. It's called a diyoy. Then you have sam, which the Gemara defines as a yellow type of paint. Sikra is a red paint. Kumus is made from a sap of a tree. Kankantum, the Gemara defines as shoe polish. Now, what can you not use? So you shouldn't use liquids, referring to standard drinks, and not fruit juice. Not anything which doesn't last. Now, what are you allowed to write on? So the Mishnah says you can write on anything. It could be the leaf of an olive tree. It could be the horn of a cow, and you give her the cow. It could be on the hand of an eved, and you give her the eved. That's a Tanakama. Lili says it cannot be on anything which is living, which has a breath of life, meaning an animal or a person, and it can't be on food. So the Gemara begins. The Gemara first defines all the items which we said before. Then the Gemara wants to know what is included by the general rule. When he says anything which is permanent, what type of inks are you including there? So the Gemara says to include, which was taught in Brisa or brought by Rav Chanina. If it's written with water, that's water that has either had fruits or things that are soaked in it that gives it an ink-like quality, or water that has filth in it. Or if it's afza, or if it's an ink that's made from gall nuts, those are okay. Now I'm going to call it a brisa brought by Rav Chia. If it's written with lead, or with shachor, or with shichor. So shachor is coals, and shichor is shoe polish, which we mentioned early. So all these things are kosher. Now the Gemara discusses Hilchos Shabbos as it relates to inks. So the Lach on Shabbos says you're not allowed to write two letters as an Issa D'Oraisa. You're also not allowed to write. You're also not allowed to erase two letters for the purpose of writing in its place. That would also be an Issa D'Oraisa. The first one is concise, the second is moichek. Erasing two letters just to destroy them is not an Issa D'Oraisa. So the Gemara discusses what if somebody has two letters written out of sikra. Sikra, we said, is a red dye, and he writes on top of it with ink, which is a higher quality writing. So what happens then? So Rav Yochanan and Rish Lakish both say he violates two Isurei D'Oraisa. First of all, he wrote with ink. Second of all, by covering the sikra, he erased it. So that's erasing. So it's erasing and writing at the same time. Now, if he writes with ink on top of ink, or sikra on top of sikra, he didn't do anything, because it's the same as it was before. He writes with sikra on top of ink, now you have a machlekes. Some say it's violated D'Oraisa is chayav carbon, some say he's pater. Chayav would be from moichek, for erasing, because he's covering up the higher quality, and the patur would be because he's just destroying it. He's not doing anything fixing, he's just destroying the higher quality that was there before. That's not an Issa D'Oraisa. Now the Gemara introduces a shaila, and we'll get into the subject of writing a signature on top of another signature, if that works. Versus Rish Lakish asks of Yechanan, what if you have witnesses who want to sign, but they don't know how to sign, they don't know how to write their names? So we could find a way to guide them in the writing, that would be okay. So what about if we write their signatures with sikra, and they sign on top of it with ink? Would that be okay? So he said, it's no good. So he says, why not? We said in Hilchos Shabbos that it would be chayev for koisev if he writes ink on top of sikra. So Gemara says, he answered, he says, that was just l'chumra. We were afraid for that l'chumra. We would not actually bring a carbon based on that. And therefore, we're machmir that that's writing, but you couldn't rely on it, likula, to create a signature on a get for that. Now the Gemara quotes more opinions as to what to do in a situation where the witnesses don't know how to sign. So Gemara brings Rav, who says that you scratch marks into the paper, and they fill the scratches with ink. And Shmuel says you use lead. Gemara says, how could you use lead? We said, Rav Chia said that lead, shachar, and shichor, all these things are kosher ksiva. If it's a kosher writing, you can't write on top of it. That's writing on top of writing. Your signature is the main one, and you didn't see it. Says, no, there's two different ways to use lead. You could use a bar of lead and rub it against the paper and it leaves a mark. Or you could use ground up lead that's mixed with water. That's a real ink. That's what we're referring to as a real ink. But scratching the lead on it, that's not. Rabbi Avo says you use meimilin. Meimilin is where you took the gall nuts and you soaked it in water. So Gemara says, but we said that Rabbi Chanina said that fruit soaked in water and gall nuts, that is a kosher ksiva. So how are you telling me that we could use that as a stencil for the witnesses to follow? The Gemara says it depends on the paper. If the paper was finished and coated with a layer of gall nut, then it's writing with more gall nut on top of that doesn't count as writing, because gall nut on top of gall nut is not writing. Now, Rav Papa said what we should use is spit, and he actually showed that halacha to someone named Papa Teira'ah to use spit. Now, the Gemara says all these solutions only count for a get. That's because by a get, it's extenuating circumstances. If we don't figure out a way for these witnesses to sign, we may lose the get. The guy may run away, and that's it. She'll remain in aguna. So therefore, we have to figure something out. However, if we're not talking about a get, we're talking about a standard other thing like a document, so then there's no need. Just go find better edim. Don't find a b'di'evid way to do this. The Gemara says it was an incident that happened with other contract, and they did it this way, and Rav Kahana punished the person who allowed them to do it this way. Now, the Gemara quotes a Brisa that says like Rav. It says if you have witnesses that do not know how to sign, you tear, you scratch into a smooth sheet of paper, you scratch their signatures, and they fill that with ink. Now it says Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, this is only true by a get for a woman, but for shtar to free an evid or all other types of documents, if they don't know how to read and they don't know how to sign, then they should not. Only if they know how to read and they know how to sign do we allow that. Samar, of course, interjects, what does reading have to do with anything? We're discussing signing here. So the Gemara says there's words missing. You have to read in. If they don't know how to read, we read for them and they sign. And if they don't know how to sign, then we scratch for them. And on that, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says that's only for Gittin Daf, but Shechrei Avadim, and other types of shtaros. If they know how to read and they know how to sign, they can. If not, we go find better witnesses. Says more further, what is Rav Elazar says, what is Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel's reasoning? It's because of agunos. We want them to be more lenient for agunos. Says Rava, the halacha is like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. Says Rav Gavda, the name of Rava, the halacha is not like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. Okay, so v'machoik is what Rava said. So it says, hold on, if the halacha is not like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, then who is the halacha like? The halacha is like the Rabbanon, who said that we do it for all types of shtaros. Well, hold on a second. We brought a story before where Rav Kahana punished somebody, gave him malchus for allowing the get, for allowing other contracts to be signed by someone who didn't know how to sign his name. So who was he going like if we're not paskening like that, we're paskening like the Rabbanon? So Gemara says, no, when we say that the halacha is like the Rabbanon, we're talking about reading. We allow reading by all types of documents. Rav Kahana was talking about signing. The Gemara quotes that Rav Yehuda used to work very hard to be able to read and sign. He couldn't see well, so he pained himself greatly to be able to read it himself and to sign it. And Ula said, you don't have to do that. Rav Elazar was a master of Eretz Yisrael. He would have people reading for him, and he would sign based on that. Rav Nachman would have the scribes of the court read for him, and he would sign based on that. The Gemara notes that's only Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman was close to the Malchus. He was close to the king, and therefore the scribes of the court were fearful of him. If it would be someone and not Rav Nachman, you couldn't trust the scribes of the court. Even Rav Nachman couldn't trust the standard scribe. We can only trust the scribes of the court because they particularly stood to lose their job if they didn't read him correctly. Now, the Gemara quotes further, when Rav Papa would have a shtar from Persian come before him, that means it was written in a Persian language, and it was made in a court of Kusim. So he would have people translate for him. he would have two separate kusim translated for him independently, not near each other, in a way that was Mesiach Lefi Tumah, meaning that they did not know that it was being used for halacha. They were just making a conversation. He would ask them casually, what does it say on here? And if they concurred, and if they said it correctly, he would use it as a valid contract, even to collect from land that was sold, to create a lien on property that was been sold. Says Rav Huna bar Nazan said to me, Neva Meimar, that a Persian star is created according to Persian rules. It's in Archais that has Jewish signatures on it. You can even use it to collect from sold land. So the Gemara says, but hold on, there's a few issues here. First of all, how could the signatures be valid if the Jews don't know how to read Persian? So the Gemara says, we're talking about where the signatures were Jews who did know how to read the language. So the Gemara says, but you have to have a signature which is not forgeable, and their shtares, the way they made them, they were forgeable. So the Gemara says it was made with gold nuts, treated with gold nuts, so that it's not forgeable. It says, but you need to have the contract review everything that it says in the last line, and that's not how they make theirs. So Gemara says, because this was a case where they reviewed it in the last line. So says Gemara, so then what's the chiddush? The chiddush is you should let her write a contract in a different language. So Gemara says, but we learned that already. We learned that if you have a get which is written in Hebrew and its signatures are signed in Greek, or it's written in Greek and signed in Hebrew, it's kosher either way. Gemara says, no, that's only for a get, we're extra lenient because we want to make sure that she doesn't become an aguna. That works for other contracts is an extra chiddush over here. Says Shmuel, if he gave her, the husband gave his wife, a blank sheet of paper and he said, here's the get, so we have to consider that she might be divorced. Why? Because it could be that he wrote it in invisible ink. It could be he wrote it in Meimilin, which absorbs into the paper and he couldn't really see it anymore. So the Gemara says we have a kasha. If you have a brisa that shows otherwise. The brisa says if he gives her a get and then he grabs it away, or she takes it, she throws it into the ocean or into a fire or to anything that destroys it. And then he says it wasn't really a get, I was lying. It was a contract with lines that were written that somebody trusted his friend, and he was saying that he owes him money as a favor for him so that he looks rich, or it was a loan that was never used. Whatever it was a different contract. It was not a get. So the halacha is we don't believe him, and she is divorced. Why? Because he can't come afterwards and try to create an isser on her. If he divorced her, gave her the get, he can't come and say, no, you're really usher to marry anybody else. So Gemara says that this all is clear that there was writing on the get, and he therefore tried to give an excuse as to what the writing was. But if there would be no writing on the get, he couldn't say afterwards, we would not trust and assume that there was a get that was written there if we didn't see anything written on it. To go so far as to say that it was invisible, we wouldn't, that would be a greater chiddush that we should say if that was true. So the Gemara says we're referring to where you checked it. That you took a revealing kind of chemical, you passed it over the paper, and it made the absorbed writing be visible. So the Gemara says, what does that help? It's visible now. At the time that he gave it to her, it was invisible. Even if it's written there, if it's invisible at the time that it's given, that's not worth anything. So the Gemara says, no, Shmuel was just saying you have to be concerned. We have to go l'chumra. We have to l'chumra assume that maybe it was readable. We just didn't see it. And by now that we passed the chemical over, it became clear. Maybe then before, had we looked really carefully, we would have been able to see it, and therefore it counts as a get. Now the Gemara quotes Ravina. Ravina says, Ameimar said to me that he heard from Maremar, in the name of Rav Dimi, that if you have a group of two witnesses, that a get was given before them, they have to read it. If you're serving as witnesses on the get, you have to read it and know what's written on it. So Mara asks, but we just had the brisa that said that if he gives her a get, and it's taken and thrown into the ocean, or thrown into the fire, or anything that destroys it, and then he says it was not really a get, it was some other thing, it was a shtar pasam or shtar amana, she is divorced. Because he's not believed to make her forbidden now. If the witnesses had to read it, so what's the case here? What are we discussing? How could he claim that it was something else if the witnesses read it? So the Gemara says, no, it's referring to where he took it back, and it could be that after they read it, he took it back. It could be that he secretly switched it with something else. So that's the concern. And he says, no, he says that he switched it, then we won't believe him. All right, the Gemara brings a case that happened. There was a man who threw a get to his wife, and it landed between a bunch of jars. He said, there's your get. And when she went to pick it up, it was a mezuzah. So it says Rav Nachman, it's not common that a mezuzah should randomly be lying there, and therefore this must be what he threw there. That's if there was only one thing that was found there. But if she found 2 or 3 mezuzahs there, and he only threw one thing, so obviously there was either 1 or 2 that was there before. There could be 1 or 2 there before, there could be 2 or 3 there before. And therefore we'll assume that what he threw was not a mezuzah, what he threw really was a get. Where's the get? Okay, the mouse came and snatched it away. Remember, brings another incident. There was somebody who went into a shul. He took a Sefer Torah, gave it to his wife, and said, here's your get. So says Rav Yosef, let's think this through. What are the possibilities that that Sefer Torah really was a get? Could it be that there was something written on it in invisible ink? Meimilin? No, it can't be, because it's finished with Meimilin. The cloth of the Sefer Torah is finished with Meimilin, and it won't count as writing at all. Maybe he's referring to the parsha of Gittin, which is written in the Torah itself. It wasn't written l'shma. It's got to be written for her. So maybe, the Gemara says, we should be afraid that he paid the Sefer when he was writing the Sefer Torah, have his wife in mind when he was writing the parsha of the Gittin. Or it says, no, but it has to contain his name, and her name, and the name of the city where they're from. And all these details aren't there. Now, Gemara says, what's the chiddush of this? Rabbi Yosef explains the chiddush is that Meimilin on top of Meimilin